Hi, Evgeny.
Hi, Chai. Um, I see guys, Shilpa, Adam, and Jennifer, they are in Hangouts. Guys, so let's switch to the Zoom. You all should have received the invitation yesterday. I resent it. Let's switch over to the Zoom meeting and uh, I'm sorry, I cannot hear you. Wait. I have problem. Um, all right. All right, guys. So let's go. Let's get started. First of all, thank you all for coming. And first of all, I want to say thank you to Insider Inc. company that we responded quickly pretty much when we scheduled this meetup almost 2 months ago, right, Chai? Was
Yeah.
it almost even more than 2 months ago? At that time, it wasn't that bad. So we should have adjusted really quickly and responded, and we decided to do this remotely, and which is I'm pretty glad. And 200 people were signed up in the Meetup group, which is I think historically that was the record of our meetups. But ironically, we should do this online. But let's see how it goes. I had multiple warnings like, guys, be careful, Zoom is experience heavy load right now, and if something goes wrong, I mean, just in case, let's see how it goes. First of all, want to introduce the team of Insider Inc. Chad, do you want to take over?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Chaithra Rao from Insider Inc. I just want to thank everyone for joining our virtual meetup today. I know it's been a tough few weeks for all of us, but I hope everyone is coping well with the situation and taking care of themselves and their families. While we're still trying to adjust to this new normal, I'm sure many of us are feeling anxious, but maybe let's try to alleviate some of that by refocusing our attention on what we like to do, that's test automation. Um, this is a time to come together as a community, support each other, and stay positive. I would like to thank Evgeny for organizing this webinar. With that, let me hand it over to Jennifer and Adam, who will talk about our automation journey at Insider.
Yes, let me go with agenda real quick before we going more forward and let people know what we're gonna do today. So we decided to make it short. Usually in the live meetings, in the live meetup, we have like 4 sessions. Obviously, we won't have networking session, but I think we have the most important is a learning session with engineering team from Insider. And we're gonna have my favorite one is Ask Manager with Chai and Alex. And thank you for volunteering this thing. So we can ask uncomfortable questions about hiring processes. I think this is a great opportunity for all participants because when you're going to the interview, you won't be able to ask these questions. You should perform right away, right? And I think that's a great opportunity for all of us to get a little bit more about this company and how it goes. All right, so let's welcome Adam and Jennifer. And I will stop sharing the screen. Adam, you can take over and start sharing your screen. Please go ahead.
Sure. Excuse me. Okay. Welcome, everyone. We're about to present to you Insider Inc.'s test automation journey. My name is Adam Mardula. I'm here with Jen DiMatteo. We are senior test engineers at Insider Inc. I myself have been working at this organization for about 3 years now, and I must say a lot has changed since I have started. Also, I must say that even though I don't see all of you, I'm pretty anxious. I don't know if it's worse that I can't see you. Maybe I would be less anxious if this was in person, but here goes nothing. But Jen, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Sure. I've been at Insider Inc. for just over 5 years. And when I started, it was as a QA analyst, and we had no test automation in place at the time. So we've just come so far in the time that since I've started at Insider Inc. And it's just been amazing to be part of this growing team and everything that we've achieved in the last few years.
Yep. And I would also like to mention that since we've been forced to work remotely, we've been working effectively supporting our teams, and we've been continuing to release and develop new features. I hope all of you out there have been finding success, and we wish you luck in this, I guess, difficult.
So to start off, just wanted to share some information about our team. We have a tech and product team of 70+ members, supported by a test engineering team of 6 members. We support products such as website Insider. Insider has a social media following of 137 million with 2.8 billion video views and 33 million unique visitors, while Business Insider has a social following of 66 million with 279 million video views, 83 million unique visitors. We also support our BI Prime subscription model for paywalled content, our custom in-house built CMS and e-commerce platforms, and the syndication and distribution of our content to third parties such as Apple News and MSN.
So since we're here talking about test automation, let's take a step back and talk about where we were about 1.5 years ago in terms of our test automation frameworks. I think the first thing to mention is that our frameworks, or the framework we were using, was a Java and Cucumber with Selenium based framework. This is of note because the test engineering team at the time was the only team within the organization utilizing Java as their main programming language. And as a result, there were some difficulties. We didn't have external team members to rely on whenever we ran into issues. We only had ourselves and Stack Overflow to really rely on whenever we hit speed bumps. So that was maybe the biggest thing holding us back, in my opinion. And also, since we were using Cucumber, this resulted in a lot of extra overhead that we had to maintain. Since Cucumber is a specification system, or it's meant to be used as one, we weren't using it as it's supposed to be used. Its use was basically to organize our test suites and to aid in running our tests. So we were maintaining these extra files, writing extra files, doing extra work without much extra benefit to the wider teams. Another thing that was different back then was that we had one repository that housed all of our tests across all code bases. This was a problem because our work was separate from all of the other teams' works. I can say that our work was siloed. It was basically out of sight from everyone else within the organization. And as a result, we didn't have the support that we could have had, and also people just didn't know what we were working on a lot of times. We also tended to write tests for every new feature that was built, or we at least planned to. For example, we would plan to write a test for a new link added to the footer, for example. Now, a strategy like this, in my opinion, wasn't very sustainable because writing tests for every little feature doesn't provide a lot of extra value. I could say that at this point, and we'll get to this a little bit later, we're a lot more careful about what we work on, and we're sure to write tests for features that we know provide value to our users. At that point, we also had to run our tests manually, and the results took a long time to get. We did get to a point where we were able to get our tests to run on a Jenkins machine, but it was unreliable, and we often had to fall back to running our tests manually on our individual machines. One thing I could reflect on is that oftentimes we had to start our tests right before lunch, and by the time we'd get back from lunch, we would hope that the test would finish running and we'd have something to analyze. But a lot of the time, the test wouldn't even finish running, or there would be a problem, and we would have to restart the test suite. And as a result, we spent a lot of time running our tests and kind of observing them run. And this wasn't a great use of our time. We also had a lot of flaky and brittle tests, and this resulted in them not being trustworthy. We almost had a culture of it being acceptable to have a certain percentage of our tests failing. And as time went on, I think this attitude made us on the testing team trust our test less, and then everyone else also felt the same way, that our tests weren't really giving much value. So in short, our strategy just wasn't working. And at the same time, while we were struggling with this framework, our team suddenly halved in size. Our team was about 9 members at that point, and due to some changes and departures on the testing team, it was just Jen, myself, and 2 other testers and our manager. And at this point, we knew that we had to rethink how we were testing and our approach there.
So like Adam said, we suddenly had a much smaller team, but we were still tasked with supporting the broader organization the way we always had. And since our end-to-end framework wasn't working, we decided to branch out and look for new solutions. And we started looking at JavaScript solutions because a lot of our code bases were written in JavaScript. We landed on a lightweight custom framework built with Mocha, Chai, and Cheerio. This was not a replacement for an end-to-end testing framework because it can only test what's returned in the DOM and not anything that is rendered by JavaScript itself. But we were able to test things like response codes and elements that were returned in the DOM and certain aspects of our different post type templates like slideshows, videos, and regular posts. And we did find we were having success with this approach, and we were finding bugs that otherwise would have made it into production. So this spurred us on in our search for a new end-to-end framework.
Yeah, it was great to see success with the framework that we were able to put together, but we knew that we needed a replacement for our Java Selenium-based framework. And at this point, we also knew that we wanted to stick with a JavaScript-based framework, since it was the natural choice considering the composition of our teams and the work that the wider organization was taking on. So some of the frameworks that we decided to consider were Nightwatch.js, WebDriver.io, Puppeteer, and Cypress.io. So each of us on the team evaluated these tools, and we were tasked with setting up a framework or one of the frameworks and writing an identical test and then evaluating the process. How difficult was it to set up? How difficult was it to write the test? What challenges you face, and so on. So we presented these findings to an architectural review board, and while from my point of view, I thought that Nightwatch.js was a great option, especially since I had previous experience working with this framework. We eventually landed on WebDriver.io. Now, one of the main reasons why we landed on WebDriver.io was because of its wide user base and active support channels. When comparing the other options, it was clear that the support for or around this framework is unparalleled. One anecdote or one thing I could share is that WebDriver.io has a dedicated Gitter channel that you can join and interface directly with the project's founders and active contributors and get immediate responses and feedback for any issues that you're having. So for me, that's wonderful. It's something that I sometimes contribute to and have reached out to folks whenever I had issues, and I don't think this exists with other options. There's an extensive built-in method library, and this is in stark contrast with the Java Selenium framework. When we were working with Java and Selenium, we sometimes had to write methods by hand that are otherwise built into this framework, for example. And this is kind of a game changer in my opinion, because we were no longer spending hours developing the methods that test something. We were able to actually focus on the task at hand, which is actually, writing tests, and we were able to write these tests much quicker than ever before. The framework also provides a whole array of plugins that are easy to configure and add for things such as, my favorite one, for example, is the DevTools protocol. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but this provides a lot of extra functionality that is easy to work with once it's configured. We're also utilizing the Mocha framework with WebDriver IO, and this falls in line with the previous framework that we mentioned, and it kind of just makes it easier, and everyone is kind of on the same page when it comes to writing tests and the style that we write our tests.
So while we were transitioning after having decided on WebDriver IO, our organization was in the process of developing a brand new application from the ground up to power our flagship sites. One of the best features of this new application was that it only took 2 minutes to build versus the 20+ minutes that the old application would take. And this meant that continuous integration was now an achievable goal, as well as being able to plan deploys multiple times a day, since we had really reduced the amount of time it took to deploy this application. And so we started, while this application was in development, we started writing tests for the application. And like Adam mentioned, we were leveraging the DevTools protocol. This allowed us to interface with the dev console that Chrome provides so that we could do things like intercepting network requests. This was hugely helpful in our ability to test ads. And ads for a media company are just really important to make sure that they're serving properly. It's a revenue driver. It helps pay our salaries, and we want to make sure that these functions are working as expected. But we found that ad tests tended to be flaky because we would be relying on inventory from third parties that we couldn't control. So we worked with our ad ops team to develop a set of in-house ads that could be triggered with a query string appended to the URL of any of our website's pages. And this meant we no longer had a dependence on the inventory of third-party ad exchanges and totally reduced the flakiness around these kind of tests.
At around the same time, we started considering some cloud-based solutions for running our tests. I believe that at this point we were running our tests on deploy to certain testing environments and production in Jenkins. And we were running our tests against Chrome driver, but this resulted in instability, and sometimes our tests just would fail to start. And there was an extra level of overhead in maintaining the configurations on that box. So we considered these cloud-based solutions because that would take away one of the pain points when it came to maintaining our framework. At around the same time, this was probably right when we were settling on one of these options, it became, the company became notified that we were accepted into the GitHub Actions beta program. Now, when we were accepted into this program, not many people knew what GitHub Actions was. And GitHub Actions is a AI tool that is similar in some ways to Jenkins, but in my opinion, it's a lot easier to work with, and it is tightly integrated with GitHub. So all of you out there, I highly recommend checking it out and tinkering with it. It's a lot of fun to use. So after we got entered into the GitHub Actions beta program, I realized that we can utilize it to develop a CI tool, especially since our app that we were working with was a Node app that took a very short amount of time to build relatively to what we were working with before. So without outside help from outside of the testing team, we were able to develop a CI pipeline that for the first time in the organization's history, we were running end-to-end tests on pull request against a feature branch whenever a pull request was opened. And this was kind of revolutionary for us because we were running tests much earlier than we have ever ran them before. And the thing of note here is that we no longer had to rely on Sauce Labs and Browser Stack because we were able to put together a Selenium or Docker Selenium framework, or a Dockerized Selenium grid for that matter, that was actually really reliable, and we no longer had to think about cloud-based solutions. So we were able to set up the CI pipeline and also eliminate the need for a third party, all with GitHub Actions. And that was a super big win for the team and for the organization. All of a sudden, we were able to develop much faster. This helped us release multiple times a day and with confidence. And as we developed our test suite, we were that much more confident that we can release at a moment's notice.
And we didn't stop there. One of the things that we had tried to do in the past using Nightwatch.js was visual regression testing, which is a method of testing where a baseline image is compared to a new image, and the computer can tell you if there's any visual difference between the two without human intervention. This is especially important for code that may affect design in unexpected ways. So we are now using a WebDriver IO plugin for this. We had found with the Nightwatch.js version that it was just too cumbersome to maintain these baseline images. But now we have a system where as the start of every test, a new baseline image is taken from our production environment, which is then compared to the feature branch version. And you can see where the screenshot will pick up if there's a defect. We also started developing more Mocha and WebDriver IO tests for our other code bases, and more of our code bases started moving closer to continuous integration with the help of GitHub Actions and Jenkins.
So with all of that, let's take a step and think about what didn't work for us in the past. So again, I'm not knocking Java. It's a wonderful programming language, very powerful, and I'm sure a lot of you folks out there are using it. But in our case, since we didn't have support from the wider team, it was something that wasn't working for us. We were the only ones using the language, and we sometimes didn't have the support we wish we had. We had a single repository housing all of our tests. Again, this was a problem because our work wasn't visible to everyone across the organization. It was kind of like we were in a silo and only we cared about the work that we worked on. We also wrote tests for every new feature. This wasn't working simply because we ended up writing maybe too many tests, and then it was a little bit too difficult to maintain, especially since our team is relatively small. So that's something to consider, especially if you are part of a smaller team. We had flaky tests that were also unreliable. This was a problem. If you have a test suite that has a percentage of tests that you expect to fail, that's something that you should probably consider maybe changing. For us, this resulted in something bigger because we knew that we had to move away from this. We were also manually starting and monitoring tests. This was something that took up a lot of time. We spent a significant amount of our days simply starting and monitoring and restarting our tests, and this obviously was not an efficient use of our time. And also the speed at which our test suites were executed was a problem. They took up to 20 minutes. If I'm not mistaken, they would sometimes take up to 40 minutes to finish running. And especially today when teams are trying to move faster, quick feedback is essential. So waiting 20 minutes for a test run to execute is a little bit too long, in my opinion. And ask any developer and they'll probably agree.
Well, now we have found what does work. Our tests live within the app repositories that they are testing, or If they're testing across code bases, they live in dedicated helper repositories that just have the tests in them for a specific purpose. We're way more selective about what tests we write, and we are always ensuring that whatever new tests we do spend time on add value overall. Now, when we have a test failure, it indicates that there's an issue that needs to be addressed rather than just ignoring the failure. This increases developer confidence in our results. Writing our tests in JavaScript allows all of our engineers across the wider organization to understand what those tests are doing and enables us to pair program with them when we get stuck on something, which is a huge win, something we were definitely not able to do when we were siloed using Java as our language. And now our tests run automatically without a lot of intervention to have to kick them off, either through GitHub Actions on PR or via Jenkins as part of deploy jobs.
Yep. And to add to that, some things that are working now include our test results being automatically visible on pull requests. We no longer have to communicate the test results of our test executions to the wider team. Every engineer knows where to look. We worked closely with the entire team so that everyone understands where to find these test results, and everyone at this point knows how to read them and kind of they know where to look if something fails. We no longer have to hold everyone's hand or walk them through a failure, and this was something that is really working well for everyone. Our tests are running much faster than ever before. We are down to about 4 minutes right now, and this includes the app build and start time. So as soon as a pull request is opened, in about 4 minutes and some change, you'll have some test results that you can read, and hopefully you see a nice check mark on your pull request, and that's when you know that things are looking pretty good. Something else that we worked on that was working really well for the team or the teams here is the development of ephemeral environments. Now, this is something that the SRE team within the organization played a major part in, but we helped them out with this. Just mentioning this because it helps that we have these short-lived environments that are based on feature branches that sometimes we can test against, and everyone across the organization has access to this. Basically eliminates the need to test locally, and it takes away a few steps that were executed prior to this setup. Another thing that happened within the past year and a half that greatly influenced us is our rebranding. We used to be called QA analysts, and now we are called test engineers. And while this sounds not very consequential, it actually affected us a lot. It changed our mindset in some ways and kind of empowered us to be on the same level as all of the other engineers in the organization. While we still spend a significant amount of time testing features manually and working with the teams to solve issues and build quality products, the first thing that we are always thinking about is building the tools and the frameworks that all of the teams use to be able to move quickly and efficiently. So, hey, we're engineers now. Another thing is that we shifted left in testing. We are testing much earlier in the process than we have ever before. Testing on the PR level is an example of that. And this has paid dividends in that we are able to move a lot quickly. And as we all know, catching bugs earlier in the process saves a lot of time and money in the end. And to wrap it up, I could say that tests are no longer an afterthought. This means that we are planning together with our feature teams the test automation work that we undertake. So everyone that's on the team is aware of our work, they support our work, and it is treated on the same level as all of the other feature work that the teams take on. So this has been a huge change, and we attribute this to our success.
In conclusion, we know that our current strategy and frameworks are not perfect, but perfect is the enemy of good. And what we try to do is be good. And we like to say at Insider that we strive to get better every day. And that's something that we've really taken to heart as test engineers, part of this organization. And we just want to take our time to continue to grow and build upon our past successes into the future.
Yep, and would like to thank you again for joining us. I hope that you were able to take away something positive from this presentation. If you experienced similar issues, maybe you could take away some of the things that worked for us and try them out in your organization. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. I think it's really worth it to check it out, and I definitely will do this. Actually, we have a couple of questions from people, and actually, I have a question from myself. Like, do you guys have any examples that we can like check out from maybe GitHub repository, open source repositories, examples or something like that? Like snippets.
We don't have any public examples. I do have a compilation of resources that I could maybe share in the Meetup group if anyone is interested. And if you are interested, maybe I can work on putting together something that can be shared publicly.
I think that would be really helpful. That would be really helpful. Okay, we have another question, like from questions and answer. Are you guys using WebDriver for visual image comparison, or like, do you guys do image comparison at all?
Yes, so we're using the image comparison service for WebDriver IO, and that's how we're able to do our visual regression testing. And like Jen mentioned earlier, we were able to develop a system not that long ago that is actually working pretty well for us. And we're doing it in a way that we don't actually have to manually maintain baseline images like we did when the first time we tried this system. So basically our system looks like we navigate to a page that reflects what is in our master branch, and then we navigate to a page that reflects what we have on the feature branch. If a change is detected, then a failure is thrown, and that's basically what our system looks like.
Is it like another question, like pixel-based comparison?
Correct. There was a
Yes.
If I go back to one of the slides, if you look here, the purple area on this slide, on this image, reflects the difference that the that the tool picked up, and that's pointing to the differences in pixels.
It is a pixel by pixel comparison, but you can adjust the threshold of how exact you want it to be. So if you're looking for an exact match, you want to have a threshold of 0. But if you want to be able to tolerate small differences, you can increase that threshold for the comparison tool before it will throw a comparison error.
Yep.
All right, cool. Question from Cam Cliff. If a developer insists something doesn't need testing, do you feel it does? How do you convince them? Good question. Basically, how do you communicate with developers? That's, I think.
So, I mean, to be honest, we thankfully don't really have that problem. If anything, it's the other way around. I don't know. I mean, we have a good relationship with our developers where if one way or another, there's a good argument, we respect it. And if for whatever reason the developer thinks that something doesn't need testing, but I, for example, make my case and explain why it's necessary, generally everyone will agree and we'll move forward. I'm happy to say that I'm part of a team that we don't really butt heads in areas like that. Generally, the more tests that we have, the better. Even though we are very selective in the tests that we write, we understand the value of adding tests. So it's not really a common problem, I would say.
Good, good. Another question, how do you coordinate with developers who are writing the code that needs to be tested, and when or how frequently the tests need to be written, especially when a new feature is particularly large?
Well, it sometimes depends on the project that we're working on and how quickly the velocity of development is going on the actual features being developed. But sometimes we will plan to write the tests a sprint after a feature is completed so that we know that it is not in flux anymore and we have, specifications to work with. But sometimes if the opportunity arises, we will try to do more of a test-driven development where we're writing the tests as the feature is being developed. And that really just depends on the comfort level of the developer and how fast they're moving in developing the feature itself. But we generally don't want to wait for a feature to be in production for a very long time before we write a test for it, if that test will add value to our suite.
Right, makes sense. And another question from me, like, do you guys divide it like writing unit tests for, developers, do they write their own unit test and you guys responsible for like end-to-end testing or like for feature testing, is it right?
Yeah, I could say something about that. So the developers generally do write their own unit tests. They also write integration tests that are a step beyond the unit tests. When appropriate, the test engineers also contribute to the integration tests. I myself have tried and tried to contribute a little bit on the unit testing side, and then we generally handle the end-to-end tests. However, today I had an experience where a developer was very interested in writing an end-to-end test, and I worked with them. So there are no rules around this. We are all kind of helping each other.
Okay, cool. Another question from Yancho Dimitrov. For addressing effective maintainability and less time needed for writing tests, to what extent the current tooling allows for implementing new tests through reusable components? Do you track where your time mostly goes now and what's the ratio writing new tests and so on? Do you see this question?
Yeah, I see it.
We do follow, we do utilize page object model, and we find that a lot of our functions and selectors are reusable within the test. So once we build a test for a certain number of components on the page, we can often reuse the selectors that we've already built for those components or the methods that we've built for testing in other tests, which definitely speeds up the fleshing out of our suite as we broaden coverage. I know that we've started actually, Chai has implemented a Slack poll at the end of the week where we will respond with how much time we spent doing automation versus other tasks, although we haven't been splitting up that in terms of like how much is new tests and how much is maintenance. But we're definitely, since we transitioned from QA to test engineering, we've been focusing on prioritizing our automation and building out of our frameworks and test suites over other things like manual testing.
I could feel the second question a little bit though. So personally, I do find myself working on the framework and tooling extension probably more than writing new tests. We find that maintaining existing tests doesn't take a lot of our time. I think we do a good job in making sure that the tests that we do write are reliable and don't need extra once they're executed. And we do, I guess, we do have, we can't say that our current setup is perfect. So a certain amount of time does end up being used on test execution analyzing. We have a certain issue that we're trying to work through right now, where sometimes, for example, if a page takes too long to load, our framework is not able to handle that properly. So when that happens, we need to like track it down and kind of communicate that to the team. If anyone has some tips around that area, please feel free to reach out.
Okay, I think the other question is related to cross-browsing testing. How do you handle that? Because I guess WebDriver IO works specifically with Chrome, right?
Well, it doesn't work specifically with Chrome. It can work with any major browser. However, we do run our tests against Chrome only. And I know maybe you guys out there are shaking your heads at this, but we did decide as a team that this is acceptable for the time being, since testing in Chrome, due to the current browser landscape, is going to catch 90% or 95% of issues. We supplement this with a periodic cross-browser manual check. However, we are planning to maybe utilize a cloud-based solution to handle more cross-browser automated testing.
Question from Phil, like, how do you compare your previous and current test automation in timeline, like the duration? I think you already covered, but can you repeat it, please?
Sure. So let's see, what would you say is a timeline of your test automation? Meaning, is it faster? So yes, now I would say it's maybe 4 times faster to develop scripts. As I was saying, when we were developing with Java, a lot of times we'd have to develop the methods that we were using that are readily available to us in the current framework that we're using. So just removing that out of the equation saves like a tremendous amount of time. And I totally appreciate, you know, Java and Selenium and anyone who works with that type of setup, because it is, in my opinion, very difficult. It does require a lot of expertise. And at the same time, it is very powerful for certain, I guess, cases. But, you know, since we're testing for the web and it's pretty relatively straightforward, in a lot of cases, we didn't need to have such a powerful tool. And as it stands, I would say WebDriver IO is actually very powerful.
I would like to add something to what Adam just mentioned. We used to use Cucumber Gherkin as well in our previous framework with Java. And we realized that it was mostly like an overhead for us to kind of write the feature files and maintain it and all of that. And it was done by the test engineers. So we got rid of the Cucumber setup itself. And now we feel like it's much easier to just contribute to tests and add tests faster.
That's right. Yes, we were also maintaining these Cucumber files, these feature files that didn't really add any value, and it was just like an extra piece of overhead, and it took time to write these files and to, you know, manage and execute them and everything else. So that's another thing that we took out of the equation.
It's kind of funny, when we first were talking about transitioning from the Java Cucumber framework, I actually was a little bit resistant to it because I'd gotten used to working within that framework. And I was like, how will I know what step I'm on if I don't have the feature file telling with my BDD language saying given, when, then? And we found that because WebDriver IO uses Mocha and uses the describe and it block syntax, that served to kind of replace the feature file layout and the BDD of it. So we still have in our test results in our very descriptive terms of what we're testing, and it's actually a lot easier to pinpoint a point of failure in an it block than it was in a scenario file.
Another question from Sergey. I think he is asking more about your structure. Can you a little bit describe your test automation structure? And you already mentioned that you're doing POM, but can you give a little bit more details?
Sure. So when it comes to POM, one thing that we figured out that works for us, and it might not always work for every organization or project. So for the main project that, you know, I work on, we split up our page objects by component instead of by page. And this is working for us because we have reusable components across pages, for example. So splitting it up by page kind of didn't make sense in this way. So that's one thing I could say there. there's more information, I'd be happy to share it. And what is the best way to structure your test ready to keep data separately? Yeah, I mean, the implementation of page objects definitely helped. Having a nice system in terms of how your spec files are structured is important. Having a nice naming convention is important. Having consistency is important, I would say. So consistency in file naming and consistency in the describe and it block naming is important, and that kind of helps your test results and everything else look really neat.
We got more questions there, but we are running out of the time, and I really appreciate it, guys, that you are asking those questions. Maybe I will post there is a Slack channel and the link to a Slack channel. If Adam and Jennifer would be able, you guys can ask those questions in a Slack, and if Adam and Jennifer would be able, they will answer that questions, right? Let's move forward, and thank you very much, Adam and Jennifer. I think that was a great presentation, and I learned a lot today.
Thank you.
Specifically, I will definitely check out this framework with the JavaScript mockup in WebDriver.io. All right, let me take over the presentation. Okay. Thank you very much. And let's move forward with, okay, let's move forward. Yeah, and I forgot to mention that our sponsor is Test Pro. This is a boot camp which is based here in Los Angeles. And if you guys want to learn QA or test automation, please check them out. You can find them through those links. They are in LinkedIn. They have a website, testpro.io, Facebook page, and this Meetup group as well. Okay, let's move forward. And my favorite one will be Ask a Manager with Chai and Alex. Chai is a senior test engineering manager, and Alex is a SVP of technology at Insider. And please, guys, welcome them. And let's get started from the beginning. The question number one, guys, what are you looking for in a candidate? Let's say they pass by recruiters or HR and they handle over to you, right? And what is your expectations, basically?
Sure. So I think on the behavioral side, we're looking for someone who's a great culture add for the team, someone who loves to collaborate and has that special something that can make the team step up. And on the technical side, we're looking for someone who's really passionate and enthusiastic about testing and automation, who has clarity of thought and who values continuous learning and wants to grow. Alex, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think, additionally, we're always looking for somebody who understands the business as well and can apply that to their day-to-day work. So really great engineers that understand why something is important and the value it brings is something that we look for as well. And then, we're not necessarily looking to check boxes, right? So to what Chai said about we're looking for something special, just because you have all the right things on your resume and all that sort of thing, doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to be a great fit. So, we try to look for people in unexpected places who surprise us sometimes in a way. And it doesn't mean you have a degree. It doesn't mean you don't have a degree. So we've found some really great people in places that we wouldn't have expected.
Awesome. So question number two, can you share with your any favorite interview questions?
Sure, I have a couple of favorites. I like to ask candidates what they're looking to get out of their next job. With that question, what I'm trying to gauge is if they'll be a good fit for the team and what is their motivation to apply for the role. Another favorite I have is what is it about test engineering that has made them choose it as a career? I like to ask this because I would like to know if they're really passionate about the field and if they are excited to get into work every day.
Great. Alex?
I always assume that they've managed to make it through the technical rounds, and usually I'm looking for sort of high-level things like the relationships with teams. I think Adam and Jen touched on how they work really closely with the development team. So I'd like to ask things like, describe with one word what the relationship between test engineer and the engineer they're working with should be. And then I like to ask them why, right? So that, you're looking for things like collaborative or, a two-way street or something like that, so that you get that feeling that there's somebody that wants to work with a team and is looking for, for that shared experience.
All right. So what about the red flags for you, like when you do interview? Can you share with that?
Sure. I think as far as red flags, arrogance, dishonesty, and maybe someone who doesn't align with our values at Insider are some of the red flags. And not knowing anything about the company or not having done even the slightest research before coming into the interview is a red flag. Alex, what else do you?
Yeah, I think that just as a baseline, if you're not preparing for an interview, and I think the preparation is understanding what the company does, maybe trying to get an understanding of how the role that you're applying for would impact that organization. And then I'm also looking for folks that don't answer the question directly or sort of dance around a question. I think it's okay to not know something, right? Nobody knows everything. Yeah. But if you run into something that you don't understand or you don't know, sometimes people tend to like dance around that, and it gives you the sense that there's like, maybe there's something more there, or there's something that they're trying to hide. Not necessarily the case. They may just, be worried that if they say, I don't know, and ask a question, that they may get disqualified. I'd much rather hear like, I don't know, or I don't understand, or asking a question to maybe clarify further than sort of somebody being evasive.
Mm-hmm. And let's go with the resume tips and hints. What would you recommend? What are you looking for in the resume?
I would say keep it short and elegant, maybe ideally 1 page, maximum maybe 2 pages, and highlight important work that you've done, but don't add like every keyword that the role is responsibilities is asking for, because then if you are asked to give a deep dive into it and you can't kind of validate your contribution, that's kind of not good. So if you're putting in work, then kind of be ready to validate your contributions and how you've used that technology and what impact it has had on the previous organization.
Yeah, I think, I echo that. We're not looking for a technical dictionary. I think it depends on the candidate. So I think the more junior you are, understanding what people looking at you are going to be looking at, right? They're going to be looking at your education or things that you've worked, maybe organizations you've been a part of, maybe projects that you've done on your own, those types of things. But primarily as a junior person, you're looking for someone who comes across as curious or ready to learn, a lot of upside there. If we spend the time to like train and work with you, that you're going to, you're really going to take that all in and excel. As you get more senior, we're looking for things like, you're looking for that growth over time that shows that while it may not be, so there might have been a test engineer for a while, but that you want to see that the challenges are getting incrementally, more difficult, or that they're growing as an engineer. And that could be a bunch of things. It could be, going from, say, a PHP platform and then moving into like a JavaScript platform. It could be just showing your evolution of learning. It could also just be career growth, right? Going from like a junior to a senior person. And then for each one of those phases of your career, really somehow, one being brief, right? But highlighting in a couple of bullet points some of the key wins there with key points of interest or key points of information that really highlight the work that you did in that role. So it could be something like, devised tests that, covered X amount of the platform that served 100 million people, those types of things, really getting an understanding of the scale that you're working at and also like your impact there.
Okay. And I think there is a couple more questions from our side. So we experienced this very weird time. And how do you guys handle right now, first of all, working with remotely? That's number one question. And the second question, what do you think about the jobs in general? Like, do you think people will gonna lose jobs? Do you think it should not be really highly impacted, at least in your area? That would be interesting.
So I can answer that. So first of all, you're in my basement right now. So this is the most people I've ever had down here. What, 85 people in my basement? So thanks. Just clean up before you leave. But yeah, I think it's been a very interesting transition. I think one of the beauties of working in technology is that you can work anywhere. And so the team has been phenomenal at just making that adjustment to working from home. The stuff that I hear from the broader team and the folks, especially people that are living on their own and don't necessarily have a family. I have my kids running around all the time, so there's always something going on. But that can be really challenging. So figuring out ways to remain motivated and and keep yourself sane, reaching out and having virtual discussions with people. I've had a few virtual happy hours, which have been fun. But at the end of the day, it's definitely affecting everybody. Our productivity has dropped a little bit because we're, people with kids and responsibilities for others that they have to care for are being impacted and have to jostle their timelines, which impacts people that don't have those because they have to now move their timelines around as well. So, at this time, the most important thing for us is to just be a team and to support each other. And so the one thing I love seeing every day is just a couple of slacks from people that you maybe normally wouldn't hear from that just say, hey, how you doing? How you holding up? Everything okay? Those types of things. The more we do that, the better we'll be. And then as far as like the job market, so, we've temporarily paused hiring. We're growing as a business. We're actually still growing in this climate. But because we don't know what the next quarter really holds, we're just being prudent and just kind of holding our breath, I guess, is the right way to put it. I think, we've seen a lot of companies that have made layoffs recently. Some of those companies, probably were going to be making layoffs anyway. There's been a lot of that just in digital media in general, with some of the companies that have kind of overinvested. And luckily we haven't been one of those. We're lucky that we have a very strong leadership team that has made the right calls at the right time, and is, plays it a little bit safer. So yeah, I think there will be some jobs lost, and there's going to be layoffs, but you hope that companies are doing things like trying to cut costs elsewhere before they start laying off people, and that maybe looking at salary cuts before people lose jobs, right? Those are the types of things that hopefully you'll be seeing across the industry. But technology is still in demand. The focus of technology will shift based on this pandemic. It'll probably shift to more around, you're seeing it already with the evolution of the tools we're using. So I think we'll see more and more, investment in our communication tools, and probably more companies that are okay with everybody being remote.
All right, Chai, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was going to say, like at Insider, we are very flexible with the work hours, especially during this time. And we're encouraged to take time for ourselves, even during the middle of the day, if you have to attend to your family, your pets, or anything like that. And I think communication is key, especially when all of us are working remotely. And we have a work from home tips channel where people share ideas on how to kind of, manage work and life at this time. And we are encouraged to, look after our mental and physical health. Our people and culture team at Insider have some initiatives organized around that as well. And as far as a team, I feel like I'm more mindful about the additional responsibilities outside of work that my direct reports have. So that, and I have full faith in them and trust them that they are able to kind of work or use their time efficiently and be as effective as they can be. So we are trying to have regular check-ins and meetings, sometimes even more, to make sure that we're on the same page. I think overall, we're trying to work with the situation and we're on this together.
Mm-hmm. We have questions from audience, especially for those people who want to transition from different field, like in IT, they've been in help desk, for example, or in IT support. What would you recommend them to get into QA or this field to transition? Any suggestions?
So is the question that they want to transition from a different role to?
Yeah, like Mike Green is asking, I'm looking to get into QA. I've been in IT support for 5 years. How does that look to you?
Okay, so I would say maybe first get into doing more of like quality manual testing and trying to understand what it means to be a QA. So you understand, the ins and out of how you're testing and the different ways of testing and all of that. And then if you feel like that's something you're interested to explore more, then maybe you can take some online courses on automation, how to get started there, and maybe trying on your own to start contributing, maybe like a side project, learning courses from, say, Udemy, or there are plenty of resources out there for you to get started, and maybe choose a easier framework and then see how that impacts, or how do you like it or not, and then kind of take it from there.
I would also give advice that besides the bootcamp that I was talking about previously, there is a lot of other sources that you can get experience, like U-Test, for example. You can go check in there. It's for free, and actually you might get paid to do manual testing. And I think it will give you at least the sense of idea how it works, right? And I think it's could be a great experience as well. What kind of things can I put on my resume? Also, I'm sorry, not Mike, Mika Green is asking.
Well, one thing I wouldn't put on your resume is stuff that you haven't done, right? Whatever you put on there, you need to be able to support and to back up when you get into the interviews. If you feel like, I don't know what stage of your career you're in, but if you're just starting out, obviously you're not going to have that experience, right, that people are looking for. So finding ways to contribute to projects, maybe even like open source projects or any of those things, and then having those on your resume can help you. Looking at classes and beefing up your education can help you. There's a number of ways you can do that. But again, I would say focus on the things that you've done, focus on the outcomes and the ways that benefited the teams and the organizations you were a part of, and try to be as succinct as possible. You don't need a lot of fluff. It can just be, very direct and punchy.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Do you personally recommend any open source projects for getting more experience in test automation? Asking from Prince P.
I could maybe chime in there. You can pick up WebDriver.io and write some tests against a public website, for example. So if you are able to manage to set up the framework, you can, for example, write some tests around Amazon's check-in process and see how far you can get. My suggestion there is to start small and build upon your successes. So maybe first figure out how to navigate to a page and assert that the logo appears. And after that, you might want to click an icon and, you know, assert that something opens and, you know, kind of build upon successes like that. But if anyone out there is, you know, willing to try to set up WebDriver.io, I'm sure you can do it. It's really not that difficult, and there are plenty of resources that are out there that will take you step by step, you know, to get it set up.
Another interesting question from Anonymous. I've been in QA as manual automation test engineer for more than 9 years. Now I'm looking to move forward as a QA manager. What are latest skills I needed for this role? Will certifications like PMP will add any value? What do you think, guys?
I can talk to this a little bit maybe. So I don't believe that you need to have a certification to become like a QA manager. So if you have had experience and you want to transition to becoming like a people manager, I think you can take that leadership on in ways in your current role and see, you know, how you can make an impact on the organization. So I don't believe that you need to have any certifications as such. So it's about how you are going to kind of strategically think about the long-term goals for your team, kind of working with the team to come up with these goals. So we feel like we're kind of in this together and make sure that we align with the company and the business value goals as well.
You know, certifications aren't bad, right? I think understanding, you know, having a PMP will definitely won't detract from your ability to manage a team. You know, I think getting an understanding of the different segments of the business is super helpful. When, you know, the transition to manager from being a contributor is, it can sometimes be pretty difficult for people. There's this sort of feeling that you're not being productive anymore because you're not contributing code or you're not, you know, creating value in that way. And what the change is, and the thing that is the part that you have to focus on is focusing on making sure the team is successful, and that if the team is successful, and even if you feel that you're not you know, as productive as you used to be, that's the job done, right? And so skills that help you do that are more important. And those skills are things like communication. It's being supportive. It's understanding that, you know, your years of experience as a QA engineer gives you empathy that helps you understand the situations they're in, and bringing that to your decision-making process is super important. You know, as far as like the skills that you need, you know, it's not necessarily a specific language or anything like that. I think it's those soft skills.
I can also add here something that nobody will promote you as a manager unless if you do it by yourself. It's a huge step towards ownership, and whatever your certificates can get, but if you're not willing to take ownership, you won't get promoted, or if you can get hired as a QA manager, but I mean, the performance will be not as that expected, and it's easy to fail. So I think soft skills, as Alex mentioned, is about ownership. I mean, ownership is totally even in a sole contributor is very important. But here you're gonna be owner of the whole project, of the whole processes, and that's, I think, the most crucial. If you can feel it that, oh yeah, I can do it. Not just I can do it. That's mine. That I am responsible for that, and that's it.
Right.
Right. There is another question. Is bachelor degree really required to get a job in QA field? Interesting. What do you guys think?
not a requirement. No. We have a good mix of people. I think, Chai, you have a degree, a bachelor's degree in computer science, right? A master's, actually. I think Chai has a master's in computer science. We have some folks that don't. I personally don't have a degree, and we have folks that are, engineers that have business degrees, right? So I think it's all about it, the stuff that you've learned, what you bring to the table. It doesn't hurt. It's not I wouldn't say it's a requirement.
Yeah, I personally have a business degree, and I sort of just fell into this career. And I mean, I'm not upset about it. I'm actually very happy with how things ended up. I never imagined that I'd be working in technology.
I have a theater degree, of all things.
That's
so
awesome.
it's definitely not what I studied, but I always had an affinity for technology and started out doing HTML development in the late 90s. And coming into QA was a way to use some of the tech skills that I had built but had lapsed since I wasn't up to date on the latest languages. So when I started as a QA analyst, it was kind of bridging the gap between the HTML tech knowledge that I had with my affinity for finding like typos and errors and things. I just that's what I love to do, hunting down irregularities. And it was a great fit. And now I have a career and couldn't be happier about it.
Yeah, I think from our team, we have people from various backgrounds now, and not, I definitely agree that we don't have to have like a bachelor's degree or master's degree to get into a QA job.
Awesome. Another question, like, should we hide job gaps in the resume? If we don't, then what happens? What do you guys think?
I mean, that goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that, whatever you put in your resume, you have to defend. People, have job gaps for all sorts of reasons, right? They're, changing careers. They could be, attending to their family. And I think in today's world, that the gaps are less and less important, especially in technology, right? I think you should be prepared to talk about it if you have one. If that job gap is because you got laid off and you had trouble finding another job, use that time to develop your resume, right? Use that time to maybe contribute to projects or to, become a part of an open source community, so that you can show that progression through that time period. Maybe use it to take some online courses, those types of things. So you can find ways to, creative ways to fill that gap. But, I think the hardest part is when you kind of go into an interview with a gap and then you're not prepared to talk about it, right? So someone says, oh, I see you were out for a few months here, what happened? And then you kind of stumble on the answer. I think if you're confident and you say, hey, this happened, I filled the time with X, Y, Z, and you show that you were still productive in your own way through that time period, or were able to handle whatever it was that happened during that time period, that can really help you.
All right. I have a question for myself. How big is your QA team right now? Like, how many engineers and QA analysts are working with you right now?
So we have 6 test engineers, including myself. And then we partner with a crowd testing company who do our manual testing. So yeah, I think as Jen and Adam mentioned in the presentation earlier, at our tech and product team is about 70 people, and our team is about 6.
And you mentioned that you are hiring, but you're on the hold right now, right?
Yes, we are. So just through Q2 at this time, obviously with everything that's going on right now, it's I don't think anyone's really looking for jobs, and it's difficult for us to sort of work through that process without being able to meet candidates and what have you in person. So we were planning on doing remote interviews, but we also, with the possible recession and what have you, we thought it was prudent just to pause, see how things shake out. And then at this point, we fully intend to start hiring again once we get through this period.
Mm-hmm. So once you guys will resume hiring, how candidates can apply to you, and what's the best way actually?
So we do a lot of promotion on LinkedIn. We obviously have our careers page on our website. We try to promote through Twitter as well. So those are the ways that you would become aware of what we're doing. We're constantly updating our blog, so we're writing stories there, so talking about what we're doing, and sometimes we'll talk about some of the roles that we have available. I think those are probably the primary ways to sort of follow us at this time.
All right, I think we need to wrap it up, and I want to say thank you to Jennifer. She answered a lot of questions in the chat. So Jennifer helped me a lot. And
Thank
so
you,
yeah,
Ben.
yeah, please sign up to the Slack channel that I posted earlier. And team from Insider, you are welcome to post the opening as soon as you resume hiring process. And I hope if you have any, you can post your questions there and we'll try to answer them as well. And thank you very much, guys. I think it was really informative, and specifically in this interesting time.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
thank you
for having us. And thank you everyone for joining us today, especially during this time. And looking forward to more testing events in the future.
All
Everyone
right.
Stay healthy.
Stay healthy. Thank you.
Stay home and be healthy. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.